It's a common trope, not only to conflate Jewish people with like greed and stuff like that, but to have fantasy races that are Jewish coded for some reason.
Yeah.
And I mean, even like Star Wars kind of does it, because they have the moons, and it's MUUN, and I'm pretty sure like things were called like Moonish, and they're the international banking clan. They control all of the finances in the entire galaxy, and it's like one specific race of like cunning beings, and it's very Jewish coded. But I don't know if, I think a problem is that like it exists in so many mythologies that people can create that without meaning to. Because
you could just be copying other mythologies instead of the actual original connotation.
Yeah, thinking of all the races that control banks and being like, okay, I'll combine all those characteristics together, and you're just doing anti-Semitism again, on accident. Like, I think that's a big problem because they do it, and I don't know if it's intentional by any writer, but I don't. I think it depends on the person. I think they either lean into it or lean out of it, when, especially like when an eye is cast on it. Like, Harry Potter leans into it.
Yeah, it seems when it comes to certain things. Other things they leave like obscure enough.
Yeah.
But like what you were saying about the horn.
Yeah.
Really didn't have to do that.
Yeah. Could have done like a jingle, like a little.
That's the thing, is like you could easily do the exact same story, but not make it based off of an actual racial stereotype.
Yeah.
Like a way more cartoony example of like slavery in media would be in the Jak and Daxter games. In the first game, there are these like animals, I guess, that are like the main enemies. And then in the second game, you're in the future, and those animals are now enslaved, and you have missions where you're freeing slaves that are like being held captive. And so like there's no fucking racial, like, they're not based off of black people or anything.
Yeah.
They kind of act like dumb, like almost like cavemanish, but they're like purple furry things. Like there's no fucking way you would be like, okay, this is about black people. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
You can easily do that with like Harry Potter. Like take the fucking goblins.
You would think a whole room of writers would be able to be like, okay, so how do we approach this like serious group of people and not like a group of fucking like fucking crypto Nazis,
just a caricature of a racial stereotype that exists in our world.
Yeah.
And apply that to these monsters in this fantasy world.
How about we create our own original lore,
Yeah.
Like, I think it's always just so strange to have a race in control of banking. Like, I think that's always the first misstep with like a lore, like to have a race in charge of banking, because it's not like, that's strange to do because it's never like that. And in like any type of like society that's multicultural, you'll have a few people who are in the banks and a few who aren't. There isn't going to be a race in charge of the banks, like that's not how it ever works. That itself is a stereotype about Jewish people, Like,
it's different to say that the people who own the banks are Jewish than to say that Jewish people own the banks. And even to say that would be a very generalized statement. Like, not every bank is owned by a Jew, but I believe the Federal Reserve is owned by Jewish people. Or
I don't know about that.
Like, isn't the Rothschilds Jewish?
I don't know if they own the Federal Reserve or about any of that, but
Wasn't that?
I think the Federal Reserve is a government institution.
Well, that's Well, the name Federal Reserve is kind of a misnomer.
Well, it's a private organization.
From my understanding, yeah. It's like the biggest criticism of the Federal Reserve is that it doesn't function the way.
Well, I know a lot of people criticize it, but they don't understand what it actually is. The Federal Reserve isn't owned by private organizations.
Was it started by the Rothschilds?
See, I think that might just be like a genuine I think that's a
or maybe
myth.
I might just be conflating things actually, because the Rothschilds that's the richest family in the world, but so I might just be conflating that with the people who started the Federal Reserve. That might just be my mistake.
The Federal Reserve was created in 1913 by the Federal Reserve Act to serve as the nation's central bank. And before 1913, that's when it was complete fucking chaos between all the banks,
I was just wondering if I was mistaken about it being, but I'm not saying anything about who owns it. So, who started it.
Regulate Federal Reserve. So, yeah, there are 12 regional Federal Reserve banks located in cities throughout the nation that regulate and oversee all of the privately owned commercial banks. So, a dude could own half the banks in America, but he would own half of the commercial banks that are under the purview of the Federal Reserve banks.
Yeah.
But you can't own the Federal Reserve banks because those are federally owned.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the Rothschilds own. I know that there's.
I think that was my mistake. I think I'm just conflating the richest people with the people who started the Federal Reserve. I think that was just my bad.
Well, I know a lot of Alex Jones type conspiracies will say crazy shit about the Federal Reserve that just isn't true, because it's trying to get people to not understand what the Federal Reserve means, and it's just a regulatory agency basically, so we don't have a bank go bankrupt and ruin a bunch of people's lives, like happened a bunch of times. It was funny because if a bank got robbed, it would straight up be a bad thing for everybody who had a bank account there. And so bounties for bank robbers were banks would put out kill this person, wanted dead or alive bounty for $10,000. And the government would be fine with that. It was hardcore back then,
that Wild West shit was.
But this is this is post Civil War. It's not even Wild West anymore.
Well, Wild West is during and after Civil War as well. It kind of started fading out around that time. But not that this is the greatest historical reference, but the Red Dead Redemption games are both based after the Civil War.
Yeah, but that's
a couple decades after the Civil War.
A couple decades. It's still 1800s though, right?
The second game is a prequel, and it's based during the turn of the century. It's 1899.
Okay.
And then after the story, you're in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
And then the first Red Dead is based in 19.
See, when I think of the Wild West, I think of a little bit wilder than that, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying is even around that time, it was Wild West type shit. That's what I was saying is the concept of bounties that you could just, all right, this motherfucker robbed us, kill him, and we'll pay you.
Yeah,
that's fucking hardcore. That's Wild West type shit. That's not how shit works anymore.
Or for a long time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and for good reason. Because fuck that scary shit. Fuck that scary shit. I'm not gonna get hit by the bank for shooting kids. Shooting kids. Shooting kids. Don't shoot those kids. shooting kids. Don't go into the bank and shoot those kids with the guns
Why are there
because you
kids in the bank?
weren't told you couldn't buy a gun.
Why are there kids in the bank?
I don't know, but could you imagine the bank robbers just run in there and they just like fucking aim right at the kids? Pow, pow, pow. Everybody get on the ground just after shooting the kids.
Get on the ground or your daughter's next.
No, get on the ground or you're next. Like after
it was all the kids, yeah.
So like all the stakes are already on the ground. You
That's
know,
fucking.
that is hard.
That is hardcore
and a little quirky.
But
That's what people come here for, is a mix of edgy and quirky humor.